All my life I've wondered, what did Kirk's first mission as captain look like? And then I saw it. Space. A continuous extension interval between planets, stars and other objects. These are the critiques of the critic McElvoy. His continuing mission to review strange new shows, to seek out new work and new bastardizations, to boldly note what no critic has noted before. Hello Critics Loggers, you are very welcome to yet another edition of this show, the only show that tells the truth about modern Star Trek. It is, I like to say, the antidote to Will Wheaton's Radio Room, but it's a lot more than that. It's almost as if Will Wheaton himself was inverted, turned inside out, and all of his organs and spilled out onto the floor, and I don't really know where I'm going with this. So, let's talk about Strange New Worlds, episode 6 of season 3, the shellac that ate its tail. What's a shellac? It's a Vulcan creature of some kind. It's a Vulcan figure of speech, Mr. Spock tells us, that means an animal following its instinct. But then, having followed its instinct, just being kind of immobilised by it, not knowing what else to do. Something like that, The snake that strangled itself. The shark that chewed its own fin. I'm not really sure. I fully grasped the metaphor, but it really doesn't matter. Look, what was this episode about? This was about Kirk's first mission as a Starfleet captain. Now, you and I, as Star Trek fans, have spent all of our lives wondering what that would be like. It's been perhaps documented in non-canonical literature. It's been referred to, maybe, or alluded to on screen or whatever. But we've never seen in live action that first ever mission, the moment that Kirk assumed the captaincy of the Farragut. We've never seen that. No, that was it was safe in the past that was never televised, the past that we were free to speculate on, and that's the fun stuff, isn't it? Speculating, imagining the things that you don't see on screen sometimes. It's lovely that a show can give you so much, a franchise can give you so much, as Star Trek does, but leave all these little gaps and these little areas for you to explore in your own imagination. But Alex Kurtzman and Akiva Goldsman and Henry Alonso Myers and all of these other fucking miscreants don't believe in that. Because for them, the untold stories, all the stuff that lies in the past, all of that biographical stuff is just material to be cannibalised. They're like, scavengers, you might say. Mindless monsters, asset stripping the franchise. Perhaps once upon a time they had aspirations to go out and do something good. and useful to further the cause of television production and to create stories that would captivate a whole generation. But at some point, they succumbed to their own instincts and they became mindless beasts who saw Star Trek material as just something to co-opt and suck dry in years for their own nefarious purposes. So it was good of them, I thought, and interesting that they created a villain in this episode that stood in for them. The scavengers were mindless beasts who had created an incredibly sophisticated giant starship. Something that was capable of stripping and sucking dry a 23rd century starship. 2, in fact. Could swallow it whole and then just drain it of all its power and strip it of all of its resources and all the rest of it. Strange New Worlds has a problem. I mean, it's got many problems, as you know. But one of them is its tendency to create villains that are technologically highly advanced, but weirdly, mentally, simpletons. They did it with the Gorn. You know, we still don't understand how the Gorn can be this highly sophisticated warp-faring species and be mindless xenomorph-like killers driven by instinct. The two don't sync up. You know, say what you like about the new Alien Earth series, but at least the alien is once again just a stowaway on a more sophisticated starship. You know, Noah Hawley, or whatever his name is, didn't introduce a concept of a fleet of fucking alien ships piloted by H.R. Geiger's monsters. That would have been absurd and incongruous with the alien universe as we understand it, wouldn't it? But in Strange New Worlds, we're asked to believe that, you know, the Gorn can be mindless monsters and a warp-faring civilization. And in this episode, we're asked to believe that a group of humans who left Earth, I don't know, 150 years earlier, have managed to Borg-like assimilate technology from other races, build this enormous ship that looks like a giant creature, a giant monster, can swallow starships whole, and yet not develop anything like, I don't know, a culture or a set of ethics or communications tool or any means of identifying with and communicating with fellow humans, which, let's face it, should be really fucking simple. I mean, they're the same species as you, and they talk the same language as you. You don't have to be that bright to just say hello, do you? Hey, I'm a fellow human. How you doing? I'm Chuck from Bullshit USA. Nice to meet you. Well, they can't say that. Apparently they can't say anything. For no reason other than to facilitate the plot of this episode. These humans who've been out in space for 150 years, as we discover at the end, choose to say nothing and communicate nothing and see every spacefaring civilization as just a resource to be consumed. Does that make sense? I mean, you'd think, wouldn't you, that they would be so delighted to see fellow humans at an advanced stage of spacefaring technology that they'd want to reach out to them and say, "Hey, it's us. We're the descendants of the people who left Earth 200 years ago. Boy, are we glad to see you. We've got so many things to tell you. The things we've seen, the things that we've done." You know, Julia was impregnated by a tree. We've got so many stories. But no, they say nothing. And because they say nothing, Captain Kirk, who's assumed the captaincy of the Farragut in extremis, the captain, the Vulcan captain receiving some kind of serious cranial injury and being beamed to the Enterprise, and the Enterprise being kidnapped by the spacefaring monster vessel, and you know, Kirk having to captain the Farragut with a few selected officers from the Enterprise, who coincidentally will later become the core of his crew on the Enterprise. He is very gung-ho and young and full of cum, and you know, he's a risk taker, as the script reminds us all of the time, and he doesn't like to hold back, and it's, "We come in peace, shoot to kill, man," that sort of thing. So this is very much the stereotypical caricature of Captain Kirk, as understood by normies in the wider culture, not to those who actually watch the original series, but let's not get into that now. We've been over this many, many times. This is Star Trek as imagined by people who don't really know Star Trek or don't care about it. So, Kirk, all gung-ho, let's rescue the Enterprise and let's fire Mr. Spark, our special torpedoes. Doesn't explain why they're special or what Spock's done to suddenly make that ship vulnerable to their weaponry, the Enterprise's weaponry, but the Farragut's weaponry, sorry. But it doesn't matter. It works. The ship explodes, and then they discover 7,000 crew floating in space who can't be rescued. So Kirk, the celebrated James T. Kirk, the greatest starship captain who ever lived, begins his career as a Starfleet captain by murdering 7,000 humans. And not just any humans, but the descendants of the first humans in deep space. The prototype, if you like, in theory, for Starfleet. The first people who wanted to boldly go where no man has gone before, to seek out new life and new civilizations. And they survive for 150 years in deep space, only to be killed by James T. Kirk.
To hunt a species to extinction is not logical.
That's not what you imagined, was it, when you were thinking about Kirk's first mission as captain? Now, all of this is these 7,000 murders. All of this is allegedly to teach Kirk a life lesson about, ironically, about empathy, about humanising the enemy. This is the pep talk that Pike gives him at the close of the episode. But it occurred to me, and maybe it occurred to you too, not that you watched this shit, that in order for that to work in episode, there'd have to be a scene or moment where Kirk could have made an attempt to communicate with the intruders, the scavengers, could have reached out to them, but didn't, opted instead to just destroy them. You see what I'm getting at? There had to be a fork in the road scene, didn't there? Where he made the moral choice, in this case the wrong choice, But I got to the end of this episode and I didn't see any. I was scoring Kirk's first performance and I thought, did pretty well. He used his sort of charisma and can-do attitude, and sort of gung-ho attitude to push the crew to go further and faster than they would have done otherwise. He made Scotty, who was a sort of whining, insubordinate little shit, work harder, do more. He gave Uhura and Chapel a bit of confidence. He won over Mr. Spark by showing him a bit of vulnerability. And no one on the bridge of the Farragut went, excuse me, sir, I don't quite think that this is the right... eventually they all came round to his way of thinking. And they were under threat. The crew of the Enterprise were under threat, existential threat, They were fighting for their lives. The Farragut was on a rescue mission. Kirk was trying to do his best to help them. He didn't know anything about the enemy because the enemy had not deigned to communicate with him or in any way express any other intention other than hostility and aggression and murderous intent. They said nothing. So what choices did he really have? Given the information that he had, what could he have done differently? He felt guilty when he found out that he killed 7,000 people. But these are 7,000 people who at no point made any attempt to communicate with him or tell him who they were. Pike said it, didn't he? In the final scene. Well, they didn't recognise us, or they didn't want to communicate, Whatever. He didn't know, he didn't have a clue either. It was weird. If one day, of course, Pike and Kirk will realise that the answer was bad writing. But for now, it's a head scratcher. I mean, one of the scavengers didn't kill Pike because he was a fellow human being, so there was obviously some recognition, species recognition there. But why didn't the scavenger just take his helmet off and say, "Brother"? Why didn't he do that? Why didn't he do something? You see what I mean? It doesn't make sense. It wasn't a mute crew. You couldn't run a big starship in deep interstellar space and never speak. You understand what I'm saying, don't you? If this had been... Let's put it another way. If this episode had been written by anyone involved in the original series of Star Trek, or indeed in the Berman era of Star Trek, surely to God they would have worked in some sort of angle where there was an attempt at communication by the other side which was misunderstood. They would have set up the tragedy at the end by having it be a sort of a mismatch of a misreading of intentions. A tragic misreading of intentions. I thought a little bit of the episode Darmok. Do you remember Darmok? In which, of course, the Enterprise D didn't understand the Children of Time, or didn't understand why they spoke the way they did. So didn't understand that their intention was not hostile, but the frustration that lack of communication engendered led to a misreading of intent, which caused an escalation of tension.
Who the hell are these people? There's got to be some way to get through to them.
Which was only finally diffused at the death, because on the planet below, Picard had succeeded in communicating with the Temerian captain and had understood their basic language. That's what that episode was all about, you know, the importance of communication. What was the moral here? Well, next time, try and empathise with the enemy if you can, Captain Kirk. Even if you have no fucking information about them at all. Even if the only thing they've done is demonstrate an aggressive intent and a want to kill you. Try a little bit harder to put yourself in their shoes. Just 10 episodes of Strange New Worlds are produced every year. Not even every year. And yet, despite this, and despite the time they have to make these episodes, we say it every week on this show, don't we? They just can't get the scripts right. And they've got so much time to draft and redraft and redraft. You can bet your life that the TNG writers' room would have seen the immediate flaw in this idea and would have corrected it long before it had been filmed. I'm not saying the writers in the Berman era or the TOS era never made mistakes. Of course they made mistakes. But surely you'd have to be a simpleton not to read this script and say, well, the conclusion is really interesting, but it's just missing something. It's missing that explanation as to why this human crew did not attempt to communicate with the 23rd century humans. I mean, even fucking V'ger tried to communicate with humankind in Star Trek The Motion Picture, and V'ger is just a fucking probe. But even it had an impetus to say, hey, I'm back and I want to tell you everything I've learned. Fortunately, he didn't say it like that, or it would have been a very silly movie indeed. But you know, there's a whole, almost like a whole season of episodes to be made about what happened to this human crew and why they were so compelled not to communicate with humans when they found them in deep space, or even try to. But that's what you get with Strange New Worlds, you know. They're audacious enough, brazen enough, arrogant enough to backfill TOS canon, but not intelligent enough to do it with any dramatic integrity. Let's do anomalous readings. Lots of little things this week. Kirk was so bored as a first officer on the Farragut, he couldn't even remember the star date. Just kind of nonchalant. It's star date, whatever. I hated that. I'm sure it was supposed to be a joke, but it just irritated me. Obviously, Paul Wesley's take on Kirk is very, very kind of stereotypical, but it's also charmless. If you squint, if you really squint, maybe you can see a little trace of Shatner in his performance, but Shatner had both charisma and levity. And Wesley, next to him, is very dead-eyed and just doesn't have any of that oomph. You know what I mean? Kirk was a little bit of an eccentric character in his own way, which was in tune with his daring do, you know. Do I get that from Paul Wesley? I do not. Scotty said something really weird. He said, what in Baird's name? Referring to John Logie Baird, the inventor of television. That's an expression in the 23rd century? What in Baird's name? So the man who invented TV has become a synonym for God? Television's a redundant technology in the 23rd century. As Data says in TNG, and fuck what you've seen on Picard, which doesn't count, says something like, that form of entertainment did not exist beyond the year 2040. So it's been redundant for 300 years, but apparently the man who invented it has become a sort of, godlike figure in the minds of engineers. No one in Scotland has ever said, what in Baird's name? Never. Is John Logie Baird the only Scottish person these writers know? We need to, wouldn't it be funny if Scotty said something and, invoke the name of an old Scotsman as a figure of speech? What historic Scottish people do we know about? Was Mel Gibson Scottish? No. Who else? Well, maybe something connected with what we do, like a media. What do? We make television. Oh, cool. Didn't a Scotsman invent TV? Yeah. What was his name? I don't know. Scotty's attitude toward Kirk annoyed me, calling him reckless and all the rest of it. Hasn't Scotty's practice always been to kind of lie about how difficult something is so he can look good? Or try to innovate and do different things other than those things he was strictly ordered to do? Couldn't that be construed as reckless? Shouldn't a maverick kind of applaud a maverick? That's just a little note on characterization for any of you who write Star Trek in the future. Why was Pike remotely alarmed by anything happening to him? As we've discussed in previous episodes and in previous blog reviews, the main structural flaw with Strange New Worlds is that Pike knows his fate. He knows exactly what's going to happen to him. He knows eventually he's going to be irradiated and he's going to end up in a bleep chair. So he knows he's not going to die any other way. He's certainly not going to die by some bloke in a big spacesuit inside a giant monster ship, because that does not correlate with his vision of the future, which came from his visit to the planet of the time crystals or whatever. So he knows he's not going to die. So why is he even remotely alarmed? Kind of ruins tension, doesn't it, when the fate of a character is known both by the audience and the character themselves. There was a little bit of so-called humour in this episode, and as usual it was thought to come from Carol Kane's character Pelia. Now, Pelia, you may recall, is 5,000 years old, and her quarters reflects that. She's got artefacts from different time periods that she's lived in, that she's picked up, etc, etc. She's got like Andy Warhol pictures of herself, and during this episode she said she made a veiled reference to the 1980s and said that she was finally glad she lived through them, meaning she didn't enjoy them the first time round, which for my money makes her a bit of a who didn't enjoy the 1980s, for God's sake. So she came up with this scheme to use old telecommunications technology and actual phones to allow a bridge crew to talk to Dr. Mabenga and Number One, and get them to coordinate an effort with the thrusters using joysticks from some sort of 80s games console. I'm sure this looked like a terrific idea on paper. I can imagine the writers of Strange New Worlds going, laughing it up at their own cleverness. But no, it was kitchen awful and silly. And you've got to make up your mind, I think, in an episode like this. Is this a serious show about character development and crews in peril? Because you know where you're going with it. You know what that stomach punch of an ending is going to be, or at least you hope it's going to be a stomach punch. But you lighten it up with this sort of frivolous toss. The two don't really work together, do they? And that returns us to our favourite theme, which is that this is a writer's room that can't develop their ideas to their full potential and produce episodes which are kind of tonally schizoid. So you always come away from every Strange New Worlds episode feeling both dissatisfied and undernourished. So, that's all for this week. We've had Captain Kirk's first ever mission, the mission we've waited to see all of our lives, and now we've seen it, and we wish we hadn't. Till next time, I'm Dr. McAvoy, it's not my real name. Live long and prosper with yourself.
Close the channel, Mr. Worf.
Gladly, sir.